Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to chat here. And for the folks out there, Frank is really a SaaS veteran who has sat in a lot of different go-to-market roles, ranging from a marketer to a strategist, researcher, and now like customer success, which, if you think about the sort of trends that we've been seeing in the space, you really have to understand the entire buyer's journey, even post sales. And you're one of the guys out there in Austin, Texas, that's leading the charge. And just real quick, for the folks out there, maybe you can tell, folks a little bit about your background and, how you sort of went down this path to be able to understand and sit in so many different roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on the show. I think we'll have a good discussion today, but even through my bio, you get a sense of my perspective on why I love customer success, why I've ended up there after, working in a few different departments in software and marketing, and how I, feel it's at its strongest. So, bottom line, I started out in consumer market research. I was a quantitative analyst for a long time. That set me up to be a strategist at marketing agencies and in-house for brands, right? So my attitude towards marketing is, what is the voice of the customer? Where are we getting the signal from? Where are we deriving insights? How are we making data-informed decisions? And these are all buzzwords that you hear around, but you would be surprised how quickly organizations get siloed in terms of collecting that market feedback. So, about 10 years ago when I moved into the software as a service world, I was already a marketer and already a researcher, and already loved working for clients. I think my favorite thing about watching a product get strong and stronger is seeing it in use, hearing back from the market. So we'll talk a little bit today about various things that customer success does, but my favorite might be gathering insights, feeding back into product marketing, feeding back into the product roadmap, right? Like helping the company tell its story based on what customers are doing with the platform.
As you've seen the customer success function sort of evolved, and you think about the past, present, and future, how have we gotten to where we're at here today? And what does that future state look like? Where is that function going?
Yeah, a lot is written and posted about this every week. So we've all got our opinions, but I like to say that customer success is not good enough if it's too focused on divorce prevention. And yet, when the function got invented, we had sales and we had implementation, and it was like companies would wait until there was a problem with losing customers or like a little bit of that customer fatigue before they actually installed a good customer function. So it's got kind of a weird reputation from the past. Then companies started seeing that if you set up 8 calls a year with your enterprise customers and you're visiting on site twice a year and you're presenting them with all these materials, there's a way to burn them out as well. So I think we went through an era of like overstaffed customer success. And what software companies learned was, oh, I might be making the problem worse because I'm actually over servicing these. And who knows, somebody in finance might see it as a cost. So then there was a little bit of a pulling back there. But around that time, I think the emphasis on revenue is going to be all important for companies. And that's really what we're seeing in customer success today, which is, you've got an opportunity with your best customers to grow with them. So you're working hand in hand with sales to do that. And then you've got an opportunity with your best customers to tell the rest of your customers what it looks like to be a Gold Star client. And that's the piece I was talking about with market insights and kind of customer marketing. So those are two in the past, 5-7 years, 2 functions of customer success that I've seen almost eclipse the importance of renewal and churn mitigation, because a lot of the tools we have now can really help us, get in front of renewal and churn mitigation. But having an expert strategist on your team is really what's going to lead to expansions and what's going to lead to those product insights.
I know we're going to talk a little bit about AI here in a little bit, but the relationship that you can have, let's just assume the ACVs or the lifetime value of the customer, it justifies that kind of white glove human experience, right? From a customer success perspective. But that's certainly something that, at least until we become robots, I'm not sure what that's going to look like. We're still going to need that human touch, right? And so that's one of the things that sort of surfaces when you mention that. The other thing is this idea, from your perspective, the idea that within some organizations, sales will help with or even own the renewals and expansions. And then in other organizations, you see CS really driving the expansions and renewals and those sort of things. Like, do you have an opinion on who should be owning that and not making it, transactional in either way, right? Because on one side, it's kind of weird to be, as an entrepreneur, I experience this all the time where I'm like going out and selling the project or whatnot, but then also having collect cash, right? So it is a weird kind of dynamic. And on the other side, if you think about like, so let's just say that's a sales function, but on the other side, it's like customer success is I am on your side in your corner to help you become successful. And then I got to go, oh, well, here, like, you got your renewal coming around, right? So like, how do you actually like manage that? So again, the first part of the question is like, who do you recommend sort of own that kind of piece? And then how do you sort of like massage that and work the art of it?
I know we don't love it depends answers, but all the strongest sales and customer teams I've been in have been made up of human beings, and they all look a little different based on where you see the strengths and how you want to deploy people, how you want to challenge people to grow, but also trying not to force them uphill, so to speak. So I've worked in organizations where the drive for commercial wins really sat in sales because it's a growing company and people just love it. They love changing the game, setting up that relationship, multi-threading, building out an account plan, and then just converting. They're motivated in that way, so they're a really good fit for kind of new customer acquisition. But my experience in customer success, and I'm repeating my typology, which is research, analyst, service provider, consultant. To me, it's always been natural to grow with a product when you're getting the information about how it's related to saving the customer time or money. And so my journey, at least, has been like, oh, the commercial part of CS is not scary at all if you know what you're talking about and you believe in what your product does, right? So again, this might look a little different depending on what you're selling. And I think it might look a little different depending on how your team is built out with people. If you've got people who are of that analytic mindset, who are, service oriented and customer obsessed, great. I think you can turn them into salespeople because they've got the truth on their side. Mm-hmm. If you've got people who are competitive, they love the win, revenue to them is like, sports military analogy, then it might make a lot of sense for sales to own expansions because that's just the culture behind that product.
Yeah, I actually think that the depends kind of answer makes a lot of sense and is more aligned with reality, right? This is one of the reasons why you can't just like read a blog post or listen to a podcast and implement that strategy that you heard, right? It does depend on some of the nuances, and some of that qualitative stuff is actually pretty influential, right, in how you actually deploy a strategy and kind of design your organization. So I do appreciate it. I know that, Frank, you mentioned that sort of the future state of customer success is really diving a little deeper into the listening function for product and marketing. If you were to think about kind of the optimal way for customer success and product marketing to align, what would that be if you had any tips around that, and why does it matter?
Well, I think that product marketers are analytical in their drive to express ROI. So they're looking for the same signal I'm talking about that comes out of the customer book. And there may be product marketing orgs that do a bit of that. They work with the customer council. They listen in on calls. They're looking to gather that for what they're going to communicate to the market. But not always. There are some that like, hey, product's releasing a bunch of features and product marketing is going to write them up, and they're going to write them up, just within the basis of why we think what we're building is special and different. So I think that working hand in hand with your customer folks, I think it just requires like a broadening of perspective among marketers, where they say, these folks are not just our hands, they're our ears. and we want to kind of build some workflows where that information is getting back to product marketing. You mentioned AI earlier, and I think when you were asking about it, what I see ahead for customer success is a lot of doing more with less, running faster, getting more volume through. So that's a very generative AI answer, which is like, okay, your CS rep used to have 5 enterprise accounts. Maybe she can have 9. And her rhythm of getting results reports and QBRs out the door is going to change, not only in its quantity but quality. They're going to be based on better information. But I think as we move into the agentic era, listening for a signal is where technology is really going to help us out a lot. And I'm not perfect at it. I'm sure you've had various experiences too, where how do we know what we're building next is right? Not only for the folks we're working with now, but the folks we want to work with. And then how is it the right for the most accounts to enable the largest addressable market? I think it's what every company wants, but I think it's a tougher equation than talking to a couple customers, listening to a few things. It's where generative AI is going to help us create a framework for the signal, but humans are still going to have to define what signals we're trying to get out of working with customers.
As an entrepreneur, I've sort of chewed on this quite a few times over my career and have dealt with it at every organization I've ever been part of. And it is the balance between sales and the insights and kind of the functionality and features that sales thinks make sense. And then you have CS that might look different, right? And then you have the product team that has their own roadmap and some of the assumptions. And then you have this vision that, at least in my opinion, should be driven by the founders, right? And how do you sort of find that sweet spot between all those variables? Because on one side of the coin, now I've admittedly always been a salesperson and been on kind of the bandwagon or in the sort of camp that suggests we should be customer focused, right? And constantly listening to what the market says, because at the end of the day, they're going to buy the product or not. But then there's this other piece, which I think a lot of engineers and product folks have sort of pushed for, which is, but we have this vision, right? They sort of are reminded of Steve Jobs and how Steve Jobs would always say, well, the market or the customer doesn't know what they want. And, we have to tell them what they want, and those sort of things. I don't think I quoted that accurately, but I think you get the point of what has been said about sort of that statement.
There's also music. There's a clip you can watch of the guys from Oasis saying that about popular music. Same idea. The real creative killers didn't wait around and do market research on what the next big hit song would be.
Yeah, Rick Rubin, right? There's a lot of content going around from him, and he's very much, speaking in a very artistic way. And I think that's the beautiful balance, is how do we find that sort of balance, that yin and yang between, this maybe a numbers salesperson, CS person's perspective on what the customer is literally saying, hey, if you have this, I'll buy, versus the artist, right? And so I don't necessarily have the answer, but from your perspective, is there anything that has really sort of worked for you to find the intersection or the balance?
No, it's too complicated of a mystery, but it's really fun to think and talk about. And I would never say that one side's right or wrong, because as much as I like learning from customers, and I'm a researcher at heart, I've seen amazing innovations come out of the head of an entrepreneur or a founder that weren't there before. So we need those folks as well. I'll say this, it's just a personal work style. It's a little bit of a personal mantra of how I like, why I enjoy startups and watching companies grow, how I like to do that. I like to focus on a great example, build it outwards, and then rinse and repeat, right? I love it when it's just 3 of us starting a company and we've got maybe one customer in a state of health. And we've got to really look at what are the traits there that's got that customer into a really great state of health. And then say, I need these things to come true on the next 10 customers if we're getting anywhere. If I can't make them come true, what was it about that first that wasn't, much of an exemplar? Or have we got the signal all wrong? And so I think there's a version of that in selling deals as well. If you're talking about new customer acquisition, there's always that moment of like, oh, this is our biggest deal yet. Or, this is the most famous kind of well-known Fortune 100 logo we've signed up yet. Great. That sounds like an exemplar. What were the traits that got it across the line? How do we repeat the process of what we just did there? So maybe I'm stating the obvious, but I do think it's a great way to work interdepartmentally to say, hey guys, I'm holding something up as an example of excellence or where we want to go. And I think that like inventors and product manager type personalities can do the same thing. They can say, I'm going to show you a user flow where this person just like nails it, gets all the value out of the platform. You go, all right, but that's not going to be every customer. So which traits of that do we want to repeat each time?
Yeah. What are those patterns? Well, I wanted to wrap up with AI. What is, in your opinion, kind of when we think about the balance between speed and quality, what is the right mix? What won't AI, in your opinion, make obsolete?
So you know that in my various career detours, when I'm not a researcher or a customer success guy, I've also enjoyed working at creative agencies with like wizards of copywriting and logo design and brand design. I mean, they've created the things that, make the hairs on my neck stand up. And it's going to be a long time before machines can really do that for us. So I think we are in a moment from the perspective of marketing, deciding between quality and quantity. And I think as consumers, we're scrolling through our feeds now and we're seeing more good enough, gets the point across, but it's kind of junk. And so I believe how you win for attention in that space is with some kind of directive from a human creative director. For now, I definitely can't predict much further out than a few years. But what I'm seeing, and this may be your perspective too, as a product marketer, and especially with the tool that you guys are building at Asset Mule, personalization matters, relevance matters, context matters. Our ability to just go make 10 of something and flood the internet with it isn't special now because everyone's doing it. Yeah. What's special is probably getting through to somebody with something that picks up on their buying habits or their business needs at the right moment. And I think that's still a little bit more of an art than just a formula.
Awesome. One of the things that stands out when I think about where we're at is this distinction between the mass-produced product, right, that you could get at, nothing against IKEA, but let's just say IKEA or Walmart, right, that maybe is going to be a little more economical from a price point perspective. And I'm choosing my words wisely because I don't want to speak negatively of anything.
No, it's good stuff. It changed the world, right? It democratizes access. So it brings a lot of value.
Absolutely. But then you also see the artist or the indie craft, men, right? That is handcrafting something, right? And that handcrafted handbag, let's just say, is going to be a couple $100, right? You might pay $500 for that handcrafted, unique piece of art. But from a functional perspective, that same handbag that does the same things at Walmart might be $20, right? So I think there's probably a world where both exist, and they will, just based on, a lot of different variables. But there may be sort of a novelty, right, of something that is human made that maybe we've never had to deal with in the past.
Yeah, and also, how big is the decision you're making? Price tag and longevity and length of sales cycle. I think that defines like the quest for quality, right? So I can definitely go to Costco and grab a mop handle, be pretty satisfied. Mop handle is not a game-changing decision. A car is, where I want to go to university, pretty big deal, buying a house. And I'd say the same for B2B. I think there's a lot of B2B purchasing behaviors that are a little more commoditized. And then there's like large expenditures with long-term partners. And I just don't see how you completely commoditize the communication of those sorts of business decisions. You need a person in the mix. You need that nuanced kind of, I trust what's going on here. You know, there's a relationship. So that's what I think the future of like enterprise B2B selling is going to look like. You can run faster and spread your message further. But these aren't the sort of decisions that you'll just say, okay, my agent talks to your agent, we click. It just doesn't feel like that to me for a while.
Yeah. Awesome. Frank Burns, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. If folks wanted to get in contact with you, what are the best channels or URLs to reach you?
It's Frank L. Burns on LinkedIn. I'm doing a lot of networking right now, just finding out what people are working on. Again, thanks so much for letting me come on your show, and watching back episodes of your show has been useful to me, because just like everyone, I'm spending 2025 just trying to keep up and educate myself. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk to anyone about what they're working on, and staying in touch with you guys at Asset Mule. I think there's a real need for what you're working on. I know it's changed a couple times in the time you've been working on it. So yeah, the future's exciting.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Jorge.